All right, this is the concepts video for this project. And what we are going to look at here are some of the projects that have been completed in the past. And we're going to talk about what is working and, what the individual designer thought about what they were working on and how they applied styles to the different to these different projects. So our very first project is on constructivism, and it was a pretty edgy movement for the time. And you can see that they have picked up on some of the edgy qualities, some of the architecture that was happening at the time, playing around with the typography in terms of the way it might have been handled during the constructivist era. Playing around with graphical elements like these circle graphic elements, these vertical graphic elements, playing around with some typography in terms of hierarchy, again picking up directly on what we just learned in the last exercise about playing around with concept and overlap and transparency, playing around with repetition in the graphic elements, playing around a little bit with leading. You can see a little bit of a problem right here with the leading here. Line spacing, it kind of got messed up, probably because of the initial larger cap letters there. But consistency, again, right, between typefaces and styles. Again, as we pick up on some of the continuity elements, that circle comes back. These vertical graphic elements, the black graphic fields, the larger red text, black borders around images. Again, these are consistent graphic elements, and this is an important part of creating continuity in a multi-page document, is to find these graphic elements or treatments or typography or whatever it happens to be, and you repeat them throughout the design. So you see that here I guess we probably should have had a circle in there, right? Because she introduced that circle here, and then it didn't go, and then we have the vertical black, and then the circle comes in, maybe because she used it primarily where the artists were. But these are all things you want to think about. And so, a large graphic element, a large graphic element, a large graphic element, so, and then smaller graphic elements, the black borders and so on. So these are the kinds of things that you want to think about as you are creating the project. And so let's move on to, let's go to this one. So Dada, this was a fun movement, pretty edgy, again, for the time, more like World War I. And again, picking up on basically throwing out all the rules. And so typography is a little bit crazy, the layout's a little bit crazy, and yet there's still a lot of consistency. For example, the way that she was handling the type treatments, the graphic element along the bottom, we see that graphic element at the top, we see the texture in the background. We can see that started here at the beginning. It was introduced in the type, and then it turned into graphic elements. Then she was playing around with shapes, putting things on angles. So those angles are consistent yet not the same. And then she was the way she handled her different graphic treatments of her of the artwork of the individual artist, playing around again with the more radical typography that was going on at the time. I mean, you can see even in the sample projects, the type is really crazy and wild. And so these are the kinds of things that you want to pick up on when you're looking at your movement and going, well, what were they doing with type? What, or if they did at all. But even then, what was the style that was happening, and what could you do to emulate that with typography? Even flipping things upside down, having a really good time with the type. So there's just really a very, very successful project all the way through. And so it just has a good sense of continuity. So if we start it from the top and we kind of just run through it, taking a look at how all the different pieces work, noticing, columns. In this case here, I don't think she used a very strong grid, but by the same token, it still feels pretty consistent all the way through. So again, a pretty nice project all the way through on that one. I keep going to that one, but what I really want to do is end with that one. So minimalism, and if you know about minimalism, and this is something that it's a style that was very prominent, and yet its influence never ended. So you'll still see work done in a minimalist style, even though minimalism as a movement had a very specific time when it was introduced and during its heyday, so to speak. And so this designer decided to use a very minimalistic type. So very, very architectural, very clean sans serif design. Um, Again, a very clean sans serif type for the body text, using nice clean initial caps, playing around with minimal overlap type things and playing around with these minimalistic shapes, playing around a little bit with hierarchy in the names, and again even hierarchy even in the little captions for the artwork, playing around with these black perimeter shapes around the imagery of the designer, of the artist, and of their work. And so you can see a fair amount of consistency in those kinds of graphic treatments and those graphic layout elements. And so even in here, that was the back. You can look at it and you can see a good sense of continuity all the way through the design. And so these are the kinds of things that you're striving for when you work on this project. You're looking to find those kinds of graphic elements that can help you create that continuity and the consistency from page to page and from spread to spread. Here again, the format is open. And so in this case, this person decided to do a very long, narrow design, which is fine. You don't have to stick to any given format, and this was something he felt was appropriate for that particular movement. And then we come to Cubism, and if you study Cubism, you'll see that it had a lot to do with trying to determine a 3D experience in a 2D space. And so again, it was very cutting edge for its time. And this might be a more challenging kind of style to try to emulate. So they sort of went more with a very straightforward graphic treatment. This is something that I would have given some serious thought to, in that Cubism had some pretty cool stylistic elements to it that would lend themselves well to graphic treatments, graphic continuity elements, perhaps typography. So while the design is super clean and very successful, you can even see a very strong sense of the grid layout here, especially with the designers. Notice how the continuity in the grid, it all lines up really nicely. Again, this is something that, as a designer in publication design, these are things that we'll discuss, and we'll talk about grids, and we'll talk about alignment and so on. And in this case, this would be considered a very, very, I guess, to the book kind of design. So it's successful, and it's clean. Unfortunately, I feel it doesn't capture the movement, the style of the movement very well, but it still is a very, very, very nice design. So even if you're struggling with your movement and what to do with it, you can always revert back to a super clean design. And then the final one, the reason I wanted to end with this one is because this designer had also taken my layout and design class, and so he was using a much more sophisticated grid, and it's called a dynamic grid. And it's, although I don't know that he actually captured the abilities of the grid to do some really cool things, I feel that the design itself was super sophisticated and did a really nice job with, like, look at the flow line right here, this vertical flow line right in here. Notice how, well, so much for that. Don't notice the continuity grid there. But you can see it's just a very, very nice, clean design. And again, I feel like maybe it didn't quite capture the essence of the movement. If we see what some of the artists are doing with these cutout shapes and the blocks and those kinds of elements, probably could have been a little bit more playful in terms of what he did with his graphic design. But by the same token, the layout itself is very successful. And so these are different ways that you can think about handling a project like this where you're dealing with continuity amongst multiple pages. So that's in essence what you're going to be doing as you design this project. Okay, so here's the grid, by the way, that he used, just to kind of show you some of the possibilities that exist when you do a dynamic grid. So kind of fun. Okay, so anyway, let's have some fun with this project.